Welcome to Impostor Hour with Liz and Greg. We're here to explore imposter syndrome that haunts creatives, delving into how it affects their lives and work. Join us as we chat with authors and artists about creativity, self doubt, featuring imposter characters in their stories, and the occasional imposter who pops up in their day to day lives.
And today we have the pleasure of welcoming Karen Dukess to the show. Karen is the author of The Last Book Party, which was an Indie Next and Discover New Writers pick. As of this episode's release, her new novel, Welcome to Murder Week, is out tomorrow. Karen also hosts the Castle Hill Author Talks, a series of virtual and in-person interviews with some of today's most exciting authors. She's been a tour guide in the former Soviet Union, a newspaper reporter in Florida, a magazine publisher in Russia, and a speechwriter on gender equality for the United Nations. She has a degree in Russian studies from Brown University and a master's in journalism from Columbia University. She lives with her family near New York City and spends as much time as possible in Truro on Cape Cod. Karen, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Welcome. And you are in Truro, Cape Cod right now.
I am. Yes, I am.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about your upcoming pub week for Welcome to Murder Week, your current book. And, when this airs, this will be on shelves the next day. But I think it's kind of fun to launch in to talk about that lead up to pub week, whether it's a debut or, as in your case, this is your second novel. And you were talking a little bit about, kind of the calm before the storm and your happy place as a writer, which also is the setting of your first novel. Can you tell us a little bit about, being on the Cape and what that means to you and how it is contributes to your creative process?
Yeah, so I'm in Truro on Cape Cod. Truro is almost at the very end of the Cape, right before Provincetown, which is at the tip. And I've come here every summer my whole life. My parents were coming here before I was born. And when I was about 10, they built a house here, which I share now with my sisters. And it is definitely it's my favorite place to be, and it's my favorite place to write. The Last Book Party, my first novel, which came out 6 years ago, it's hard to believe, is set here, and I wrote a lot of it here. And it was I didn't realize how much setting was important in my writing until I wrote that book, because I was writing, I thought it was because of Truro, because I was writing about a place I loved so much, and it was so easy to write about. It just I didn't need to look up what flowers bloom in the spring, or what kind of wildflowers are growing on the railroad tracks. I just had it all in me, and it just came out. And I was kind of almost surprised when some people would say the place was almost a character in that novel, because but then it turned out my second novel, Place, was really important too. Set in a completely different place, set in the English countryside after a 1-week visit there. So I did have to do a little research there, because I didn't have that place. I loved it, but a week's experience of a place is very different, it turns out, than a lifetime. But yeah, it's something I didn't realize how much place motivates what I write.
Yeah. Did you, with the second book, then going to a place that had been, kind of theretofore unfamiliar to you, did you, when you started thinking about the story that was going to kind of come out of that visit, did that change your process in terms of going in terms of visualizing the story, formulating maybe the action or the characters or anything like that? How much did that setting shift kind of, I guess, change your process?
So the setting, well, it was interesting because, Welcome to Murder Week is about a young woman, American woman, who discovers that her estranged mother, after her mother dies, she discovers her mother had bought 2 tickets for them to go to the English countryside to solve a fake English village murder mystery. Right. And my character goes, she doesn't even really want to go, but she can't get a refund, and she goes. And her whole experience in that place was very much based on some of the experiences I had when I went to the English countryside. So I went to the English countryside a couple years ago with one of my sisters, and we took a week-long vacation, and I knew I would like it because I just, we went because I had seen a friend's pictures of, tea shops and pubs and footpaths and castles and, all of that. I was like, we wanted to do exactly that. But when I got there, I was amazed by how much I was experiencing the whole place through books I had read and
Mm.
movies I had seen and shows I had watched on BritBox, on Masterpiece Theater, even the Great British Baking Show. So
Mhm.
everything I was experiencing there was almost like, oh my God, that's like, look, a church, a vicar, or, oh, a parking attendant. Like my sister and I had never heard of a job as like a parking lot attendant, not like a garage, but like a public parking lot attendant in a uniform. We had only heard of that because I think one of the contestants on one of the seasons of the Great British Baking Show was a parking lot attendant. And then we saw a bona fide parking lot attendant. So everything I was seeing, it was just a very funny experience. Like I couldn't do anything without feeling like I was Elizabeth Bennet, walking across the field. Where was my basket? Um, and so when I came back, I just decided I wanted to write about Americans going and having that same kind of experience in England, seeing it through what they had seen on TV and what they had read. And the nice thing about doing that, since I had only been in the place for a week and I didn't take notes because I wasn't planning while I was there to write the novel, is that I was writing about the place through the perspective of people that didn't know the place and had erroneous assumptions about the place. So
Mhm.
they couldn't, it was like they could be pretty stupid, they could make mistakes about things. Whereas I don't know that I would have had, I think if I were trying to write a story set in the English countryside with English people,
Mhm.
I think that would have been maybe foolhardy of me because I don't think I could see the place in that way like I could in Cape Cod. So
Mm.
it kind of gave myself an out,
Mhm.
like they can say stupid things, like they can look at something and think it's something because they saw it, on Father Brown, and they can be totally wrong. So,
Right.
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 Well, you mentioned something that I definitely wanted to make sure we talked about today, which is from your character's perspective, Kath in Welcome to Murder Week, when she's at this week of solving this murder, she's kind of coming at it from the point of view of kind of a book lover and with other book lovers and people who have a lot of knowledge of literature, kind of, and a wide swath. Um, and this is also something that's, I think, really integral in your first novel. In fact, in the author's note, you say, and I don't think I'm spoiling anything here, a lot of people have asked you if the love affair in the first book is based on something in your real life. And you say the book is about a love affair, but it's actually about your love affair with literature and books. And in both
Yeah.
cases, you have such brilliant references to great works of literature and some contemporary works that I found myself writing down books that I had never read that I wanted to read because of your mentions in both books, and then books that I wanted to revisit. So, this is a very long prelude to the kind of imposter question for you, which is, from what I understand, you started writing your first book in your 50s. You,
That's
based
right.
on your bio, you've had some really interesting careers before you became a writer. You clearly are a bibliophile and love books and story. So where were we in between you being a young reader, I'm assuming, and then into your
Yeah.
50s where you started writing? Like, tell us about the path.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I think, it's an interesting thing. I read a lot as a child, and a lot of that was coming up here to Cape Cod. We didn't have television here. We spent a lot of
Mm.
time here in the summer and, year round, not in the winter, but in the fall and the spring. And my sisters and I would just read all the time. And I wrote as a child too, and I wrote in a way that children write. Like a child is only going to write because it's fun.
Right.
Like it was just escapist and it was fun and I loved it. And I had a story that I wrote. I had like chapters of this story that was pure wish fulfillment. It was like my character didn't have two older sisters. She had an older brother and a younger sister. She didn't live in the suburbs. She lived on a ranch and there were like horses that only she could ride, and stuff like that. One chapter was like a big storm, and there was the county fair, and it was just pure fun. Um, and then I think in like adolescence, I started sort of, I think it's probably a combination of being female, a lot of, sadly, maybe less so than they used to. I don't know. Young women kind of become more self conscious about their voice. And then I also probably in the study of literature and the study of writing a little bit in high school, started looking at my own things critically. It's not supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be more than that.
Mm.
And it's funny with the last book party. There are about 50 books mentioned in the last book party, and in some ways it makes sense because it's the coming of age of a writer. It's in a literary community in Cape Cod, and it's in the New York publishing world in the 80s. So the people that I'm writing about are all bookish people, and all people who, some of whom are a little pretentious, and they use books as a way of signaling, what kind of intellect they have,
Right.
or who they have contempt for. And then they use books also to kind of connect with people. So it made sense that the books would be in there. But I think in a way, all these books come out in my writing because, I probably stopped writing for joy at around age 12. And then I wrote in high school and college somewhat, but with a lot of angst, and a lot of self-criticism and a lot of imposter syndrome. And then in the years after college, I'd sort of would go step into writing and step out of it. The things I did in my career, journalism, speech writing, it was never what I really wanted to be doing. I wanted to be writing fiction, and I just didn't have the confidence to do it. And it was sort of easier for me. I could write a speech without angst because it wasn't my voice. So I could sort of bang it out. And at the UN, people were like, "Oh my God, you write so well, you write so easily, it's so quick." And I wouldn't say this, but I was like, "Yeah, because I don't really care." It was kind of like, and then as soon as I cared, I would like clam up, and the inner critic would take over. But I think what happened in all those years, I was reading and reading and reading, and I've spent so much time reading. And if I had been successful as a writer, I probably would have still been reading a lot, but I would have read less because I would have had more time writing. And I think in the last book party, I was kind of amazed when I realized I had mentioned 50 books. And I think if I had thought of that idea, like, oh, I think I'm going to write a book and I'm going to have all these books in it, I would have nixed that idea. I was like, I would be like, that's pretentious. That's stupid. There's that inner critic. I wouldn't have done it, and it just kind of happened. And then, yeah, it happened again because with Welcome to Murder Week, my main character is in England along with other Americans who have signed up for this Solve a Fake English Village Murder Week because of things they've read and things they've seen on TV. So again, I put myself with like a group of sorry.
Okay. We love dogs on Impostor Hour.
The dog will stop barking. There's no way thing to just not have a dog if you're going to do podcasts. So what was I saying? Yeah, so it was very logical to put all those things in there because this is the references that my characters would use. And then it was fun because I have never written a mystery before. I have read mysteries, but I was not like a fanatic mystery writer, so I felt like I had to read a lot of them. So I read, while I was writing the book, I read a lot of Golden Age detective novels, and I watched a lot of Midsummer Murders and various shows on BritBox, trying to kind of learn like how to do this. And then there was just so many great little anecdotes in there that I loved throwing in there.
Yeah. I mean, I had the experience when I was reading Welcome to Murder Week that like I kept taking my phone out because you have these amazing historical references throughout that I would like have to look up. Also, I kept Google imaging things like the aqueduct and the various landmarks because going back to what we were talking about earlier, you're so fluent at setting, and having the setting is so lush that I would like I need to see a picture of this because I kind of want to be there even more than I already am. And one of the things, this is a side note, but that I was really fascinated is where you were talking about the kind of cultural historical fascinations with crimes amidst like much bigger like happenings. In the case you talked about the pandemic and the true crime kind of bump in interest, but you also talked about cholera and how during that time in England people were dying in droves from cholera, but they were also really fascinated with that double murder case, or the double execution of the couple who had killed the lover of the wife. and of course that sent me down a rabbit hole, and I just felt like, wow, Karen, you are definitely the kind of writer that like I love to read because I get to go down these rabbit holes that you clearly went down.
Yeah, it
uh,
was fun. And there was so much more that I didn't put in there because sometimes, there's a whole thing in there about did Jane Austen stay in this town or did she not? And I had a whole long part in there. And then someone was like, all right, it's really interesting, but it's really like not pages of it in here. And like, saved it and I put it on my Substack.
okay, good.
Um, but yeah, it was fun finding out all this stuff. I don't know, that golden age stuff is just so many things I found out I didn't know. And like I didn't know A. Milne wrote detective stories.
Yeah.
That
Neither
was
did
interesting.
I.
But I do think that
Go ahead.
I mean, I wonder, I know in the writing of Welcome to Murder Week that I wanted to write this kind of novel that was fun. I mean, it ended up having a sort of a dark side to it, a lot about grief. I guess I can't do something completely fun.
Sure.
But I wanted to do something fun because I needed my head to be in like a happy place. I had written a second novel after the last book party, and I drew on my years in Russia for that book. I spent 2.5 years writing it. It wasn't fun. I was very self-conscious about like second novel. Can I do it again? Am I a one-hit wonder? Do I really know what I'm doing? That was a fluke, all those things. And then added to that, I had lived in Russia for 6 years as a journalist, and I felt like this is my Russian novel. I have to say something about Russia. So I sort of had like I felt like I had on my back like second novel expectations and then like all the Russia experts that I know and the journalists that spent time in Russia, and sort of having all these voices in my head along with my own inner critic was not a good recipe for writing a novel. I finished it. I finished it right around when Russia invaded Ukraine. And it was not a great time to be pitching a Russia novel. And I was nervous about it because my novel was set in 2017 and in the 90s. But everything just Russia's in a different place now than when I was living there in the 90s. And it felt anachronistic. I was very nervous about it. And we submitted the novel, maybe one round of submissions, maybe 7 editors. And everyone was like, when you get those nice rejection letters, like beautiful writing, love the story, but no, thank you. And I just decided I was nervous about it. And I just thought, you know what? I don't want to keep submitting it and I don't want to revise it. I want to set it aside. This is just not novel for now.
Yeah.
But because of that experience, I was like, I got to do something fun. I got to go somewhere escapist. I have to write something that's going to be fun for me, where I'm going down fun rabbit holes,
Right.
reading about the Detection Club and Agatha Christie, and where I'm playing with the tropes of mystery novels, throw in a little romance. Like I just wanted to have fun. And, everything going on in the world, it was just like a nice escape to just like go off into this place.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Well, I had a question about the construction of Welcome to Murder Week, because what you've done is you've really done sort of a mystery within a mystery within a mystery. In
Yeah.
that you have, as you mentioned earlier, you have this sort of fictional crime solving thing, but then also Kath, who you mentioned before as well, your main character also there's like an element of personal history that Kath ends up then kind of, uncovering as well, unbeknownst to her at the kind of front end of the novel. Did you kind of go in knowing that you wanted to do this layered series of all these kind of parallels and echoes through the story?
No, I never know what I'm
Okay.
going toward when I go in. In fact, the initial idea for this was the initial thing that interested me was I wanted to write about Americans going to England and sort of seeing it through popular culture, through fiction, whether film or TV. And I like the idea. I love the idea of putting together people who wouldn't ordinarily come together, who become close because of circumstance. And so my initial idea was actually I was going to send a writing group to England. Because I love the way I'm in a writing group, and I love the way in a writing group you can get to know people in a really intimate way, because you often are sharing things that no one else sees, and you talk about aspects of your writing that you might not talk with people you're really close to, but then you leave and you don't know each other in your social lives. And so
Mhm.
and it's people you might not necessarily get close with. And I've been in writing groups like that, different ages, different walks of life, occupations. It's like the opposite of being friends with someone because you have kids the same age or you live in the neighborhood. But I was talking to a friend of mine about my idea of sending these American writers to, on a writing retreat in England. And she asked me the very excellent question of, well, what are they going to do there? Like, they're going to
Mm.
write? And then I thought, okay, they're going to solve the fake murder mystery.
Right.
And that is what I was working on first. And then, like in the first draft of this story, the mystery of why Kat's mother wanted her to go, I didn't even know why.
Mm.
But I was kind of playing with this idea of Kath not knowing something about her mother and her difficulties in grieving her mother, who was flighty and difficult.
Right.
And in the first draft, the fake murder mystery was sort of more prominent than the real life mystery. And I think it was my agent who said, well, the real life mystery has to be the heart of the story because it's real.
Mhm.
Mm. Yeah.
I mean, um, so it kind of, gradually built that out
Mm.
and somehow interwove them. I mean, at some point I realized I could make it be that Kath and her cottage mates with whom she solves the fake mystery couldn't solve the real mystery if they didn't solve the fake mystery, and they couldn't solve the
Mm.
fake mystery if they weren't working on the real mystery. And that sort of started happening, and then I consciously made that happen. I have no idea how I did it. I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize I'd written a mystery when I said to my agent at some point when once we'd sold the novel and people were referring to it as a mystery, I was like, wait a minute, is this going to sit on the mystery shelf?
Hmm.
He was like, I think it might.
Right.
And I'm like, but I'm not a mystery writer. I don't know how to write a mystery. But
Well, so that's a great segue to or path back to imposter syndrome. So I think your first novel, which I loved so much, I just have to say, and it you probably have heard this or maybe even know this book, but there's a book called The Best of Everything about publishing in the 50s and
yes,
60s. It was Rana Jaffe, I think is the
that was
author.
one of the comps for I hadn't read it, but my editor used that as a comp, the best of
Okay.
everything.
That's
Yeah.
Well,
And then I read
that's on my kind of desert island list of books, and
it. Yeah.
I haven't read a book about publishing since the last book party. That made me feel the same way as that book. So, for anyone listening who knows that book and loves it, read the last book party. But one of the things that the reason I'm bringing that book up now in conjunction with this question is, that is a very different kind of feel and texture book.
Mhm.
Um, and it's coming of age, it's 80s, it's publishing, and then you've gone and written this like perfectly crafted, I want to say cozy mystery, but I don't even know if that's appropriate because I don't know the mystery subgenres as well. But at least to me, it feels like an homage to the coziness of a lot of these
Yeah.
like small village mysteries. But then you've also layered in, like generational trauma. You have
Yeah.
romance
Mhm.
with a character who's kind of pretty fervently anti-romantic.
Yeah.
Um, I was just so impressed how you kind of have the Russian nesting doll of all these different book feels, and they all braid together so beautifully. So to hear you say like you didn't really know exactly what it was going into it makes me think about this idea of how restricting writing into a genre can be for writers. Like if you
Mm.
sit down and say, I am going to write fill in the blank, a romance, a domestic suspense, a horror, then do we paint ourselves into corners a little bit? And I'm
Yeah.
wondering what you think
That's an
about
interesting
that.
question. Yeah, because I've thought about it, now that I find myself in a genre,
Mm-hmm.
that my feeling about genre is it's not a great thing to think about when you're writing, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a really useful thing to think about when you're marketing. You know,
Totally.
like I didn't think about genre. I mean, I knew when I was creating a fake mystery that I had to write a mystery. But I've always been drawn to books that have mystery in them, even if they're not considered mysteries. Like, is Jane Eyre a mystery?
Mm.
I don't think so, but it has big secret in it. And, you know, like, these are the things that make us read, right? To find out what's going on, or to see a character find out and discover something. So I think I went into it with sort of like, I was going after feelings more than genre. Like, I really felt strongly, like, when I knew that the Russian novel was, you know, dead, or dead for quite a while, I felt really strongly like, okay, if I'm going to do this again, if I'm going to spend a couple years writing a story, it has to be fun, because it's not fun to get rejected. So you got to have fun doing the process. So I was really conscious of, like, I want to write a fun novel. I want it to be funny. I want it to have the same kind of loopy experiences my sister and I had in England. I want it to be playful. And then I was like, but I wanted to have some heart. I wanted to have some emotion, and I wanted to have some romance. Like, it was really kind of write the novel you want to read, sort of thing. So I didn't think about genre, except for when I was writing the fake murder mystery part. And then I had no clue what I was doing. And what I think the most helpful thing I did is I watched a lot of episodes of Midsummer Murders, like the early ones in particular, which are really cheesy and campy and ridiculous. But it's really easy to see the formula in them. Like, it's hard to read a whole book, especially if it's a good book. I think when you read a really good mystery, you're like, how did the author do that? It's hard to deconstruct it. When you want to watch like a half-hour episode of a show that's been on for like 20 years, like, you see the formula, you know? And I was like, oh, okay. So I have to pick somebody who has a lot of people with the motive to murder them, right? So, like, I mean, that's like, you guys write thrillers, you're like, duh. But I hadn't never thought of these things before, you know? So then I remember I was at a writing retreat when I was sort of at the point where, like, okay, I need a victim. And I literally, I mean, it was sort of a good lesson. Like, I was like, I have to make a decision. So I'm just going to choose a hairdresser, because hairdressers know a lot of secrets. And so hairdresser was my victim. And I kind of like, I think I freed myself up from worrying that I didn't know what I was doing by saying, like, I'll just try this, because I have to make a decision. So I'll just try this. So who might the suspects be? Okay, I'll try that. Like, so I almost fooled myself into thinking, like, this isn't really going to be it. This is just like a trial run. All these tricks, you know, you have to play on yourself as you don't freak out that you don't know what you're doing. And then that ended up, you know, working. And the other thing that helped, and I don't know if this is a technique for like imposter syndrome, or just for like quieting the inner critic, is sort of saying to myself, wait, this is a fake murder set up by an English village. Like, it can be really bad. It doesn't have to be good. Like, it's just for some tourists to play act murder. So I don't have to, I'm not Agatha Christie here. I just have to, it has to be good enough. And that's the same epiphany I had when I was working on the last book party, when I really didn't know what I was doing. And that was sort of just evolving. And I got to the point where I saw that, okay, I think this is going to be a novel. And it was intimidating to write a novel, but I had spent so many years wanting to write a novel and sort of stepping in and out of it because I didn't think I wasn't smart enough, or I wasn't a real writer, or whatever. I didn't realize that, you know, it is hard and you have to do it anyway. But I remember at one point saying to myself, well, if my goal is just to write a novel, like, I don't want to get to 90 years old and still be saying someday I want to write a novel, then I don't have to write a good novel. I just have to write a novel. And that was like super liberating. I realized, like, it was just important to me to like get this off the, you know, off the shelf, like, get this done. So again, like, another trick I had to play myself to stop being too serious about it, or so I don't get frozen. I don't know if you guys do that.
Well, I was wondering, I'm glad you brought that up, because that sort of leads to a question I wanted to ask you about. In the last book party, one of the subplots sort of hinges on this whole idea. There's, you know, you mentioned kind of, I think you used the word pretension earlier in sort of literary circles. And one of the kind of the relationships between two of the characters in that, hinges a bit on this whole concept of like highbrow versus fun in terms of
Yeah.
writing and reading. And so as you're talking about that, I wonder, was that something that came out of you being able to kind of finally get yourself in that headspace of like, it doesn't matter and I just want to write this book and having fun? Or was writing that, did that sort of maybe give you more confidence of, being able to kind of inject that into the story itself?
Yeah, I think the writing of the last book party gave me more confidence.
Yeah.
I started out writing a piece of memoir and bringing it into my writing group, and then I continued with it, and it just kind of went fictional, and I didn't know
Yeah.
what I was doing, and I had the encouragement of this writing group constantly to say, just keep going, you'll figure it out. Um, I think it gave me confidence, but I think when I was writing the Russian novel, I think I lost some of the confidence.
Okay.
It wasn't like, woo, I'm confident and now it's smooth sailing.
Right.
I think that the experience of, I think writing the Russian novel, I got caught up a little more in like ideas of the kind of book I thought I should write, and not that it was a super, super serious book. It had serious things in it. It still had humor in it, but it was more, it was more serious about Russia than either of the other two books. And I think it was the experience of not succeeding with that book that was actually very liberating. That it was, I'm not going to try to do something that I think I should do. Like, I'm really just going to indulge myself. When I was writing Murder Week, it really was the operating principle was, I think it's funny. I don't know if anyone else will, but I think it's funny.
Right.
With the last book party, as you said in the beginning of the interview, referenced how I always had the question. My character she's working as an assistant to a New Yorker writer, and she has an affair with him. And I've always asked that question: Is this? And I can understand why people would think the novel's autobiographical, because the character is a lot like me. She's at a summer house in Cape Cod. She's from similar background, but the story, the plot, was completely fictional.
Yeah.
But the journey of my character to sort of find her voice as a writer and realize she could do it even if it wasn't coming easily, and that her story was good enough to tell. In that story, there's a sense of like characters thinking they have to have a really dramatic story to tell it. And I think, that was very much my journey that I had to kind of go through, which is why I didn't write until I was in my 50s, because I kept thinking like, I don't have anything interesting to say. And having the impulse to write is not enough. You have to know exactly what you want to say. You have to have something important to say.
Yeah.
Well,
I wonder too, if people, assuming that it's autobiographical, is also just a kind of a testament to the quality of the writing and how emotionally attached the reader gets to that, like the emotional truth, whether there's the kind of the circumstantial truth or the sort of plot truth, bless you, in a book, but then the emotional truth is really, I think, what ultimately brings the reader in. Like, there's a great line, there are so many great lines in there, and I think your description of that kind of being an aspiring writer and feeling kind of on the outside of this, what can be a very kind of, gate kept, locked up thing, is great. There's this line that really stuck with me. It's your character Eve kind of talking about the experience of being at Brown in this creative writing program. And the line is, "It was like they were preparing to become the voices of their generation, and I was struggling to clear my throat."
Yeah.
And it's that kind of specificity that I was like, oh, I'm in, like, I feel like I'm right in her head,
Yeah,
in
and
her emotional space.
that's directly from my experience, because I did go to Brown, and there was a great writing program there, and some of the writers that were there when I was there were Rick Moody and Jeff Eugenides and Donald Antrim.
Yep.
And the thing that's so terrible about imposter syndrome, or insecurity, lack of confidence, whatever you want to call it, is it's self-fulfilling, because I, managed to write well enough to get into a good writing class at Brown. So, it was competitive. But then I was so like twisted and angsty about my writing that I didn't write as much as those guys. Like, we were supposed to write 50 pages in a semester. I didn't do it. I spent so much time second guessing myself and having doubt that even when I was supposedly writing, I wasn't getting the practice that they were. So it was like,
Yeah.
Mhm.
by not having, and I don't know if they had imposter syndrome, I doubt it, but they certainly did a good job of looking like they didn't. But they were incredibly prolific, and they wrote and wrote and wrote, and they earned it. And
Mhm.
because I was so unsure of myself, I wasn't doing it, which was then just sort of like confirming my thoughts that, I didn't have it.
Right.
And I think what I had to learn, that I unfortunately didn't learn until much later on, was that, like, everybody struggles,
Mhm.
that it's difficult and you lose faith and you lose your way. And that doesn't mean you're not cut out for it. It doesn't mean you're good or you're bad. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That you just have to keep doing it if you want to do it. And so what helped me a lot was just like reading so many interviews with authors,
Mm.
just hearing published authors talk about their struggles. Because
Mhm.
I think, like Eve in the last book party, I had this idea that if you were meant to be something, or if you had great talent for it, it would just sort of be there and it would be kind of effortless.
Right.
Mhm.
And that's just like a terrible idea, a terrible belief to have.
Sure.
But I think it's a really common one, and I certainly had it. And I know multiple writers who I think felt like they started later than they wanted to. Although, just bookmarking that for a second, I want to go back to something you said earlier, and I think are echoing now, which is in kind of absence of actively writing novels, you have been reading. And I think it was
Yeah.
Stephen King who famously said, like, if you don't have time to read, then you don't have time to write. But I'm thinking about, like, a lot of really great writers who've had longevity in their careers. Louise Penny is coming to mind. I don't think she started writing until she was in her 50s, and she's written like
Oh, I didn't know that.
3 dozen books now. But
Yeah.
she was a journalist, a voracious reader. I think there's a lot of stories of really, really wonderful writers, especially women, and I have my theories about this,
Yeah.
who and also, by the way, were like mothers and had full careers and doing all of the caregiving that women have been doing for so long. And finding time to like have an artistic endeavor is also like considered, it's like a privilege, right? Whereas I
Yeah.
think historically, cis white men out of MFA programs have been kind of lauded as wonderkins and encouraged, and it's like, oh, work on your art, and everyone else will like pay for it.
Yeah.
um, and this ties back to the character of Jeremy in the last book party, who is in fact this kind of celebrated young white guy. Interestingly, he is Jewish, but he's changed his name, right? And that's, I think, an important plot point about the kind of impostering and in publishing, and what was like encouraged or supported or hidden. But he says to Eve, like, the magical thinking that you're talking about
Yeah.
is really insidious. Like, it will keep you from actually finishing all the stories, right? The unfinished stories.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what I'm wondering is it's almost like there were two versions of yourself talking to us, the reader, and maybe yourself in the book. Jeremy's kind of saying, like, just write. And
Mm-hmm.
Eve is like saying, I can't. I have all these stories I haven't finished. And he's like, how many stories? And what does she have, like four that she's actually
Yeah.
finished?
That
But
was
this
me.
is, but then also you have he's the one who got the big book deal and is the wonderkind, and he's doing it, not without complications, which would be spoilers.
Yeah.
But did when you were writing those two characters, was that a conversation with yourself? Do you think? Like, it sounds,
Yeah, I do. I
yeah.
do. I do think so. Although, as you said, he has complications with his own, like what he's choosing to write.
Mhm.
Um, but I do, and I don't think I could have written that, even though my character in it was 26 years old. I don't think I could have written that novel when I was 26 years old, even though by then I had had a lot of the experiences, because
Mhm.
I didn't have the other voice in there. The other
Mm-hmm.
voice is saying, like, you have to do it, you have to struggle it, you have to keep writing.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
think that was kind of like the voice I found in writing the last book party.
Mm.
And I don't think, I was thinking this morning, and I was thinking, like, do I still have imposter syndrome? And I don't think I do, really. Like, I think I have the confidence to know that it's going to be really difficult every time I write a book,
Mhm.
and that I will figure it out. Doesn't mean it will be great. Doesn't mean it will sell. I know that now. You
Right.
know, my career was sort of backwards. The first novel sold really easily, and the
Mm.
second one didn't.
Right.
And then the third one, I was just like grateful that someone wanted it.
Mm.
But I think that I don't think it gets easier to write, but I don't think I feel like I'm not a writer anymore. I don't have what it takes
Mm.
because I think I had the emphasis before on sort of the talent or the innate
Mhm.
ability, and
Mhm.
now I have the emphasis more on the work.
Okay.
Mhm.
And that if you, I mean, I tell people, and I've taught classes, and I've been in writing groups with people who are struggling through their first novel, and I'm like, really, all you have to do is keep going. Like,
Mm.
just
Mhm.
be determined to figure it out, and if you get it wrong, like, you go back and fix it,
Mhm.
I had a I took a class with the when I was working on the last book party, I took a class with the writer Matthew Thomas at the 92nd Street Y,
Love
and
that.
he said something that sounds so like such a no-brainer, but it wasn't for me. And I think he was keying into the fact that a lot of writers sort of fall into this like it's innate thing, like you're either
Mhm.
talented or you're not. Because he was saying like if there's some aspects of writing a novel that you're not good at, like some people are good at writing dialogue, it comes easily, and some are not, or you're not good at just setting or whatever. He's like, you can learn it. Like it's something you
Mhm.
can learn. It's not like a God-given thing, that you've
Mhm.
brushed with it or you're not. And that was sort of helpful to me.
Mm.
I think I still have a lot to learn about structure. That's
Mm.
something.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, that you can, yeah, you want to bring some talent to the table. You want to have an affinity for what you're doing, but that if you take it seriously, you will learn how to do it.
Right.
Mm.
Well, let me
Yeah.
ask you this then. I'm curious, sort of, this is more of a cumulative experience question. As we mentioned earlier on, you came from a journalistic background,
Mm.
you have some speech writing experience.
Mhm.
When you kind of look back now in retrospect, can you see ways in which that earlier experience maybe like fed into more of a novel writing format for you?
No, I had to unlearn all of that to write a
Ah,
novel.
okay.
No, I
Okay.
really did,
Interesting.
because I
Right.
think, like, the hardest thing for me, well, 2 things. One was I thought I had to know exactly what I wanted to say before I said it.
Okay.
Mm.
Because in journalism and speech writing, you do.
Right.
You can't be like, "I'm gonna write a speech for somebody," and, like, it'll evolve, you kind of know why you're doing it. And I totally did not realize, and I used to have this discussion with my husband a lot because he's a journalist, and I'd be sort of flailing around with fiction, and he'd be like, "I don't understand how you can write when you don't know what you wanna say."
Mm.
Um, and so it's like, I know, I don't know." It was like this panic thing for me. And it was only in a writing group with other writers that they would just say, no, it's okay. Just let it unfold. Like
Right.
you will figure it out. And then you will go back and you will do it better,
Right. Right.
Mhm.
but that you can figure it out. And not every writer is like that, but I had to learn that I was that way.
Right.
And I also had to learn to slow down because, journalistic things and speeches get cut from the bottom. You need to say
Mhm.
everything straight up, like get your key points in quick.
Right.
Right.
So with fiction, it's the opposite. Like people read because they don't know everything.
Right.
You
Mhm.
have to withhold things. So I was constantly like, I was in a writing group with a leader, a man who led the group, and we would bring things in just to read aloud to each other. But then he would take the hard copies and he would write on them and give them to us the next time with his comments.
Mhm.
And for like 5 years, my things always said the same thing. It was just like, let the story unfold, keep going, but slow
Mhm.
down. It
Mhm.
was just like I kept shoving information in too
Right.
much. I mean,
Mm.
I guess, yeah. So I'm sure there's some ways, and I think, I definitely took from journalism the sense of getting things accurate, even
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
fiction.
Yeah.
So even though my village in England is made up,
Mhm.
the I put it in a real place and the surrounding places are real. It's like I plopped a fictional village in the middle of a very particular area.
Mhm.
And I was very insistent on like fact checking things. Like I didn't want to say there were rhododendrons if there aren't rhododendrons in
Right.
England. Like I had to check that kind of stuff. That is a holdover from journalism
Okay.
and also from reading, because I don't know if you have this, but like when I'm reading something and you come upon something that's just erroneous, like
Mm.
a flower that can't grow where it grows, and you happen to know that, it
Yeah.
just right away makes me think like just distrust
Mhm.
the writer.
Yeah.
Well, to shift gears into something that I think you do very well, and I wanted to ask about this, kind of going back to the romance thread of
Mhm.
Welcome to Murder Week. Your banter in that book is great, and especially, I think, in particular, between Kath and Dev, who's the love
Mhm.
interest. How have you kind of honed that ear for dialogue?
Mhm.
That's one of the things that just comes easily to me.
Okay.
Mhm.
You know, sometimes I'm like, I should write a screenplay. So I
Yeah.
could just bang that
Yeah.
out. Yeah, I just really, it's fun. I just really love doing that. And that for me, sometimes I had to kind of pull back and say like, okay, enough dialogue. We need to, have some other writing here.
Right.
I don't know. I just kind of get into it, and it's playful and
Yeah.
fun for me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
I
the
like that.
banter in the last book party was awesome too.
Oh, awesome.
So
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
you should write a screenplay and a play and all of the, a radio play, anything in
yeah. Sure.
dialogue.
Talking about imposter syndrome.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I I think I'm probably backtracking us a little bit, but I don't want to gloss over the fact that I think you've had this really important and fairly common experience that writers have, in that you wrote a book that was really important to you. I know it wasn't fun, but the Russia novel, and then that didn't
Mhm.
sell. And I don't want to gloss over the kind of grief that comes along with that. And then you went and you wrote this really amazing follow-up novel. So there's like a lot there to unpack, but I think, and whichever part of it you feel willing to share and however vulnerable you feel you're willing to get. But I, for one, when I hear stories about authors who've written entire novels and they haven't sold, and then they've made the decision to shelve them, and then they go on to write something amazing, I'm always like, what was that in between? I mean, it's like going through a
Yeah, it's
death
funny.
or a divorce. How do you come back
Yeah,
from that?
yeah, it's funny. It wasn't as devastating as you'd think, maybe because there was some relief. Because if someone, say I had gotten 6 rejections or even 10 rejections, and then somebody came along and said, I want to publish this Russian novel, I had doubts about it. I think I would
Mhm.
have been really nervous. Like, I'm getting a nervous stomachache just thinking about it right now. Like, I
Mhm.
would have been really nervous the whole year before the publication of that novel, because I was so caught up in like, what am I saying about Russia? And there's a lot of stuff about marriage in it. And there was just things that I was nervous about and unsure of. And the political situation with Russia was just like so heated. I mean, that was the time when Elizabeth Gilbert pulled her novel about
Yeah.
Russia because all her fans in Ukraine were like, how can you? And hers was historical. It was about people in Siberia who were rebelling against the Soviet regime. And
Right.
it was still like a betrayal. So I there was some relief. There was definitely disappointment. But I had been so absurdly fortunate with the last book party. When I finished the last book party, I was sitting right here in Cape Cod where I am now. When I finished like the good draft that, not the good draft, but version that like I felt done. Of course, it had more work on it
Mhm.
after, but it was going to go off to an agent. And I was so happy to have finished that novel
Mhm.
that I had wanted to write since I was a kid, and had, given up just write any novel. And then it sold at auction incredibly quickly. Like, I got an agent and he sent it out a week later, and it went to like those, I knew that that was crazy good fortune. And I know that most people have the failure first or the rejections first, and I hadn't experienced rejection.
Mhm.
So I knew even then, when it was happening, and it feels awful to be like waiting for the calls from your agent, and you don't get a call, you get an email with another, 2 more rejections. Um, when I knew even then that like most writers experience rejection. And I remember saying to myself, okay, if I'm really going to be a writer, I have to be able to deal with this, because I didn't have to yet. And that was just lucky, because that's not the way writing goes. So I
Mhm.
had a very conscious sense of like, this is when I find out if I'm really going to do this or not.
Mhm.
Um, and then I mean, thank goodness I went on the trip to England because I didn't know what I was going to write next. I was just caught up in that novel, and it was really this trip that was just so much fun. And when I was in England with my sister, I started writing these Facebook posts of just funny things that were happening to us, and I think that's where I found the voice of this novel. And
Mm.
because it wasn't like it was nothing. It was a Facebook post. It was like every night I would like post about some experience we had. I posted about getting lost on our way to Haddon Hall, which is the real version of Hadley Hall in the novel. And like we had that exact experience. Like, what's a copse? What is a woodland? Like, where are we? And we had to climb over a fence because we lost our way. So I wrote these silly posts, and the response to them was so great. People were just like, tell me more. Um, and so when I came home, I was like, I want to stay in that headspace. And
Mm.
that's, where I wanted to be. So I do think that, like having that idea come together pretty soon after letting the Russia thing go was really fortunate. And again, it's a place like I didn't know this about myself, but I was like inspired by a place, and I'm working on a
Mhm.
novel now that's inspired by another place. So
Mm.
Mm.
we're gonna run out of places.
Well, that actually sets us up perfectly for the last few minutes. As before we kind of let you go, are you able to talk about the next novel in any kind of capacity at this point, or is it still kind of early goings?
It's pretty early. I can't say much, and I'm not under a contract for it. I didn't do it
Okay.
too. This is a one book contract,
Yeah.
but it's continuing. So the two cottage mates that my character teams up with in England.
Yeah.
One is Wyatt,
Yeah.
whose husband, who owns the birding store, has sent him off on this trip, and the other is Amity, who's the recently divorced romance novelist.
Yeah.
So this novel is from Amity's perspective.
Oh,
So
great.
she's back in California. I don't want to say where because that's part of the novel, but
Okay.
she's back in Northern California and she's working on her thriller.
Yes.
So that's a bit of a spoiler, but not really. She's in a new place, and so Kath won't really be in it. Like she may be referenced in it. There may be some phone calls, but I think Wyatt will appear.
I
Okay.
So
do. I do want to make sure that I just mentioned this because it speaks to something you just talked about, and I was thinking about. I laughed out loud as I was reading this in your book. Um, so there's this great for our listeners. Amity is a romance author, and she's sort of inspired on the trip to maybe go in a different direction, right? And the line is, she says, "What I need now is to pick up my pen and kill someone,"
right.
and that so closely mirrors the way that Liz and I jumped into the process of writing our debut that I
Oh,
was like,
really? You're
yeah,
so
I mean,
angry? You're that angry?
we
Oh yeah.
both were coming out of these like very, very traumatic, separately, these very traumatic
Yeah.
situations. And we were sitting there one night at a bar, we were like having drinks and catching up and kind of, commiserating. And Liz turned to me at some point in the conversation and said, I just want to kill someone. And I said, let's do it on the page.
Oh my
And
God, that's great.
that's how we launched into our debut. That's like,
Yeah.
that was the
That's great.
genesis of The Woman
See,
Inside. So
that's a great story, but I think it also like speaks to sort of where I've landed about writing and
yeah,
in the experience of writing this novel is like if you really write the novel that you want to be reading at that moment,
yeah,
like or
Mhm.
you just like that you really not that you think you should or that you think is going to get you acclaim in some way, but if you just really go to like what you're driven to do that moment, what worlds you really want to be immersed in. Like
yeah,
I just think that's got to be the truest way to write and to end up with something authentic.
yeah.
Mm.
And I'm not sure that I was doing that with the Russian novel. Or maybe my head wanted to write it but my heart didn't. I don't know.
Right,
Mhm.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and to bring it back to your, next novel and the character of Amity, there's a great scene towards the end of Welcome to Murder Week where she's kind of writing up their findings of the case. And
Yeah.
Kath sees the like glee that she's having as
Right.
she's writing and says something like to the effect of, she's clearly having fun. And I think
Right.
the whole kind of spirit of this episode, and it's really inspiring to me, is like, you write what you want to read and what you need at the moment in the moment, and you
Yeah.
just have no idea, and it doesn't matter how it's received, and it doesn't matter
Yeah.
how other readers are going to experience it. And I think that the irony in all of that is in both books that you've written, I've had so much fun reading, and I've also felt a full spectrum of emotions. And you talked about writing in the direction of a feeling as opposed to like
Yeah.
an idea of what you want it to be. And I think
Mhm.
that's definitely like a creative prison that we all,
Mhm.
or many of us,
Yeah.
have felt like, what does my National Book Award novel look or sound like, or what
Yeah.
are my parents going
Yeah,
to think about
exactly.
this? Does this live up to my higher education, or whatever other bullshit we tell ourselves that just
Yeah,
stoke
no,
the
it's true. I
imposter
didn't even think
fire?
I realized. Yeah, and you can have those things affect you without even realizing it, I think.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't realize it until I was rid of them. But
Mm.
I just do have to say, I said I don't have imposter syndrome anymore, but I'm very nervous about writing another mystery that I think
Mm.
the second book will have a mystery in it.
Mhm.
And it was definitely less intimidating to write a mystery because I was writing a fake mystery, which is like, it all gets very meta. Like there was somebody who, there was some early review of Welcome to Murder Week was like, I was enjoying this book. And then I realized there isn't a real murder in it. So I didn't want to read it. So I'm like, oh, so people want their fictional murders to be real. Okay, I got that. But I am more intimidated in writing a real murder in the next book. So I'm like, well, maybe I won't. Maybe the mystery will be something else because I still don't feel like a mystery writer. Just not sure how to do it.
Well, you did
Well,
it though.
yeah, I mean,
Sorry.
I would push back against that assessment as well. You've already done it successfully. I mean, it
Yeah.
sounds like it sounds like the thing you keep coming back to, and it's I think something that any writer should bear in mind is like give yourself the permission to have fun and not take it too seriously, and that's
Yeah,
when you're because like you're working loose. You're not
yeah,
working under this
exactly,
pressure, and
exactly.
the looser you work, the better the thing flows. I think often.
Yeah, and I think that even if I have fun with something, like there's going to be a more serious story that bubbles up because I
Right.
like the sort of not gothic, but like in the last book party, there's this scene at the end where Eve has made all these realizations and she's up on the dune and it's stormy and it's dramatic. Like I like that stuff.
Yeah.
I like the light and the banter, but like that stuff is just going to kind of bubble up, I think, because
Yeah.
that's what I
Mhm.
like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and it really shines through. And
Yeah.
and I will say too about the not having imposter syndrome anymore. I mean, that's today. And I find that
exactly.
imposter syndrome, depending on the day, is either,
Yeah, at the time.
dormant or
Yeah.
rampant.
Yeah.
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 I mean, I think the difference is that, like, yeah, I'll still go through all the feelings and I probably will have all the imposter syndrome feelings, but it won't stop me from writing.
That's it.
Whereas before it did for years and years.
Yeah.
Mm.
So,
Sure.
Well, thank
yeah.
goodness that stopped and now you're writing and you have to keep
Yes.
writing.
Yes. Yeah.
Number one fan right here.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Um, Karen, I hate to we can't let you go, but in our last minute or so, will you tell our listeners where they can find you and what you're up to and how everyone can stay connected to you?
Yes. The best place to find me is on Instagram at Karen Dukess. I also have a Substack. I don't even never know the best way to tell people to find you on Substack. I think just put in Karen Dukess on Substack.
Let's
It
do
has a
it.
name, keep calm and carry on, but I don't even know if you'll find it that way. And I don't write that frequently on it. And I am going on tour. I'll be the first week is super busy. If anyone lives in Houston and Scottsdale, I'll be at those two wonderful mystery bookstores there. And I know nobody in Houston and Scottsdale, so please come. And then I'll also be in Chicago, and all of the tour stuff is on my website, karendukess.com, and also on the Instagram. And after Chicago, Scottsdale, and Houston, I'll be mostly like between New Jersey and Massachusetts.
Okay.
Fantastic.
So
And
June and July.
we'll put all that info on our website as well. So if people want to
Great.
check
Thank
out.
you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you
Thanks.
again. This was such a pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming on, and let us be the first to wish you a happy pub day, slightly
Yeah.
early.
Thank you.
Have fun with it.
Thank you.
And I will take us out. Impostor Hour with Liz and Greg is created and hosted by us, Elizabeth Keenan and Greg Wands. The show is produced and edited by Bookwild Collective founder Kate Herget. Scott Leeds composed our original theme music, and Steve Luoma designed our logo.
And you can find us on Instagram at Impostor Hour Podcast and online at impostorhour.com. Thanks for